The summer sun baked the dusty road that led to Dustmere's stage stop, the boards of the platform creaking as a girl, no taller than the railing, swung her legs back and forth, her chin lifted with stubborn purpose. Josie Carter had been told by neighbors to stay home, that the stage stop was no place for a child. But she had ignored them all. Her father would not choose a wife, too sunk in silence and sorrow to even try. So Josie had decided the task belonged to her. She was only 9 years old, but she knew what she wanted. She wanted a mother, and she was going to find one today. The dust on the horizon thickened as the stagecoach rattled into view. The horses lathered and straining against the harness, the driver calling out as the wheels struck the ruts. Josie hopped down from the bench, brushing dirt from her skirt, her braids flying loose around her shoulders. Her heart hammered with determination as the coach slowed to a stop. The driver swung down, opening the door with a weary arm, and one by one the passengers stepped out, stretching cramped legs and blinking against the harsh light. Josie studied each face with the keen eye of someone choosing more than company. The first was a man with a beard thick as brambles, coughing into a rag. The second, a woman too grand, her hat trimmed with feathers and her nose wrinkling at the sight of the dusty town. Josie shook her head. Then came a figure who caught her attention. A woman in a plain traveling dress, her shoulders slumped with fatigue, her hands clutching a small case. Her face was pale, her hair damp from the long ride, but there was something kind in the way her eyes softened as she stepped down. Josie knew at once. She marched straight up, planted her small hands on her hips, and said with no hesitation, "You'll do." Emma Walker blinked, startled by the voice that had come from nowhere. She looked down to find the girl staring up at her with a steady gaze that allowed no argument. "Pardon," Emma managed, her voice hoarse from the ride. "You'll do," Josie repeated, her tone firm as any sheriff's. "You're going to be my new mama." The words made Emma cough in surprise, her fingers tightening on her case. "I think you must be mistaken," she began. But Josie had already grabbed her hand and tugged, pulling her away from the stage without a glance back. The driver chuckled, shaking his head. "That's Luke Carter's girl," he muttered to another passenger. "Poor man lost his wife, been raising the child on his own. Looks like she's taken matters into her own hands." Emma stumbled a little as Josie dragged her down the road, dust rising around their feet. "Wait," she said breathlessly. "Who is your father?" "Luke Carter," Josie replied, without pause. "He don't know it yet, but he needs you." Emma tried to protest, but the small hand gripping hers was firm, and the determination in the girl's voice left no room for doubt. What had begun as another weary stop on her journey had suddenly turned into something else entirely. And as the stage rattled away behind them, Emma realized she was being led not just down a dusty road, but straight into a life she had never planned to find. Emma's boots scuffed against the dry road as she tried to keep pace with the small figure tugging at her hand. Dust rose with every hurried step, and the heat of the late afternoon pressed heavy against her back. She had not expected her journey west to take this turn, nor had she expected to be claimed by a child with such fierce certainty. Josie Carter did not slow, her braids swinging, her grip stubborn as iron. Emma tried again to free her hand, her voice breaking from the long ride. "Now listen, child. I do not know what sort of game this is, but I cannot simply walk off." "It is no game," Josie said, her chin lifted as if she were twice her age. "You are coming home with me." The word home struck Emma's chest with a weight she had not been ready for. She carried only a case and the remnants of a life that had worn her thin, a teacher who had left behind more empty seats than willing faces. She opened her mouth to protest, but the ranch appeared ahead before she could form the words. The sight gave her pause. Fences leaned as if tired of standing, fields sprawled wild with weeds, and a barn hunched low, one corner sagging toward the ground. The house itself looked weary, shutters loose, roof patched with uneven boards, and standing on the porch was a man whose very stance made Emma stop in her tracks. Luke Carter filled the doorway, his shoulders broad, his face shadowed with lines deeper than his years should allow. His eyes were dark, set beneath the brim of a hat worn near threadbare. He did not move, until Josie dragged Emma closer. Then his voice cut across the space like the snap of a whip. "Josie, what in God's name are you doing?" "I brought her," Josie said, her voice full of triumph. "This is the one, Daddy. She is going to be my new mama." Emma froze, her cheeks hot, her heart stumbling. Luke's eyes swept over her, not with kindness, but with a glare sharp enough to cut. He stepped forward, his boots striking hard against the porch boards. "You will do no such thing," he said to Josie, his tone low and thunderous. "We did not send for anyone. We do not need anyone." Josie's grip tightened, her small body braced with stubbornness. "You do not know what we need," she answered. "You never ask." Emma finally found her voice, though it shook. "Sir, I am sorry for this. I assure you, I did not plan." Luke cut her off with a hand. "I do not care what you planned," he said, his eyes narrowing. "My daughter has no right dragging strangers here, and you have no reason to stay." The words struck harder than Emma expected, though she knew they were true. She should leave, catch the next coach, and put Dustmere behind her. Yet when she looked down at Josie, saw the desperate way the child clung to her, she hesitated. Luke turned away, his shoulders rigid, but his daughter's voice followed him, sharp and pleading. "If she goes, I will not forgive you," Josie cried. Her eyes brimming with tears she refused to let fall. Emma stood rooted in the yard, torn between the fury of the father and the fierce longing of the child. And for the first time in many miles, she wondered if her journey was not meant to end here after all. The sun was setting low over the hills when Emma finally placed her small case by the corner of the porch. She had argued with herself for nearly an hour, telling Josie that she could not stay, that the coach would come through again in 2 days, and she would be on it. Yet the child had met every word with sharp reasoning, a steady look, and a voice that carried more conviction than Emma herself could muster. "You have no one waiting," Josie had said plainly, "and we have no one either." That was the truth Emma could not shake, for her life behind her had little left to call her back. Luke had said nothing when Emma agreed to stay the 2 nights, his jaw tight as he leaned against the porch rail. At last he gave a curt nod, saying only, "You can use the spare room. Do not read more into it." Emma had thanked him with quiet dignity, though she felt the edge in his words cut at her pride. She told herself she would keep her distance, do her part in courtesy, and leave with no more fuss than she had arrived. Inside, the house was tidy but bare, the rooms lined with the kind of silence that grows thick when grief lingers too long. Josie bustled about with the energy of someone pleased to have company, pulling Emma toward the kitchen and pointing out where things were kept. Together they laid out what little there was: beans, bread gone slightly hard, and a jar of pickles brought up from the cellar. Emma's hands moved with the memory of meals long past, stirring the beans with a wooden spoon, cutting the bread with care, smoothing a cloth over the worn table. Josie chattered beside her, telling stories of the ranch, of the horse she wanted to ride, of the mother she still remembered in flashes. Luke stepped into the room as they worked, his presence filling the space even though he said nothing. He watched from the doorway, his arms crossed, his eyes unreadable as he studied the 2 figures moving together as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Emma felt the weight of his gaze and kept her hands steady on the knife, though her heart stumbled with unease. She told herself it was only supper, nothing more. Yet the warmth of Josie at her side and the quiet hush of the room made her feel something she had not in years, a sense of belonging she dared not claim. When the meal was set on the table, Luke joined them, his movements slow, his silence heavy. They ate without ceremony, the scrape of spoons and Josie's light chatter filling the air. Emma listened more than she spoke, offering a smile now and then, her voice soft when she did answer. Luke's eyes flicked to her once, then away quickly, as if he had caught himself watching too long. Afterward, as Emma washed the dishes with Josie drying beside her, she caught a glimpse of Luke in the doorway again. His face was stern, his mouth set in a line, but there was something there beneath it, something unsettled. He turned away before she could name it. Emma dried her hands on her apron and looked down at Josie, who grinned up at her with all the pride of a child who believed she had done exactly what she set out to do. And though Emma told herself she was only here for 2 nights, She could not deny that the walls of the house already felt a shade less lonely with her in it. The morning light slipped through thin curtains and found Emma already awake, her hands folded in her lap as she sat on the narrow bed of the spare room. The house was quiet in a way that pressed against her ears, not the peaceful quiet of rest, but the kind that settles after laughter has been chased away. She rose, smoothed her skirts, and stepped into the hallway. The boards groaned beneath her feet, carrying her into rooms that spoke more than any words had. Everywhere she looked were signs of things left unfinished. On a chair by the window lay a stack of shirts neatly folded but never put away, their edges gathering dust. A basket of mending sat near the hearth, a pair of socks half darned with the needle still threaded, as if someone had set it aside and never returned. The walls bore the faint marks of pictures once hung, but the frames were gone, leaving empty outlines where color had been. One door at the end of the hall was closed tight, the handle polished by use, though it had not been touched in years. Emma lingered there a moment, her hand hovering near the knob, but the weight of what it guarded kept her still. She knew without asking that it belonged to the woman who had lived here before her, the wife whose presence lingered in absence. Josie found her there and tugged her gently away, her bright eyes urging Emma to follow. "Come see my treasures," she said, her voice full of excitement. She led Emma to her small room, where the bed sagged in the middle, and the floorboards were scattered with buttons, scraps of ribbon, and bits of cloth. Each one she picked up with reverence. "This was Mama's button," she said proudly. "She gave it to me before supper once when I cried about my dress tearing. And this ribbon? Mama tied my hair with it on Sunday mornings." Emma listened, her throat tightening as the girl laid each piece in her lap as if it were gold. Josie leaned against her side, warm and trusting, her chatter spilling out like water freed from a dam. Emma brushed her hand over the child's hair, unable to stop the tenderness that rose in her chest. In the doorway, Luke stood, silent as ever, his arms crossed, his eyes shadowed. He watched his daughter laugh, her head tilted back, her smile bright in a way that had not been there yesterday. For a moment his gaze flicked to Emma, and the line of his jaw tightened. The sight of Josie leaning into another woman's side seemed to harden something in him. His silence grew sharper, his shoulders stiff as if braced against a blow. Emma felt the shift when he turned away, leaving without a word, his boots heavy against the floorboards. She wanted to follow, to explain that she was not taking anything from him, only giving the girl the comfort she needed. But Josie tugged her hand again, her laughter ringing in the small room, and Emma stayed where she was. She let the child rest against her and thought of all the empty spaces in this house, each one waiting for life to return. The wind shifted that night, carrying the bite of an early storm, and the house seemed to creak with the weight of it. Emma was laying out bread for the morning when she heard Josie's cough. A small sound at first, but followed quickly by another, then another. She hurried to the girl's room and found her curled beneath the quilt, cheeks flushed, hair damp with sweat. Emma pressed a hand to her forehead and felt the heat at once, fierce and rising. "Hush now," she whispered, smoothing the quilt and brushing curls from Josie's face. The child stirred, her lips parting with a soft moan. Emma fetched a cloth, dipped it in cool water, and laid it against her brow. Josie sighed faintly, her small body trembling with fever. Emma pulled a chair close to the bedside and sat with the cloth ready. Her heart quickening with worry, she tried to keep steady. She began to tell stories, the kind her mother had once whispered when she herself was a child. Tales of fields that bloomed with flowers overnight, of birds that carried secrets across the sky. Josie's eyes fluttered half open, heavy with fever, and now and then a small smile tugged at her lips as she listened. From the doorway came the sound of boots, slow and hesitant. Emma looked up to see Luke standing there, his face shadowed, his arms hanging heavy at his sides. His eyes fixed on his daughter, but his body did not move forward, as if the sickness had turned him to stone. He stayed rooted to the threshold, watching, his mouth pressed tight. "She is burning," Emma said quietly, her hand steadying the damp cloth against Josie's forehead. "I will stay with her through the night." Luke gave a stiff nod but did not enter. His silence filled the room, heavy and raw. Yet Emma did not press him. She turned back to the girl, murmuring more stories, wiping her brow each time the sweat gathered. Hours stretched long, the storm beating against the walls, the lantern burning low, but Emma stayed, her hand never leaving the child's. At one point, Josie stirred, her small hand lifting weakly from the quilt. Emma reached at once, and the girl grasped her fingers tight. "Mama," Josie whispered, the word faint, drifting on a fevered sigh. Emma's throat tightened, her eyes stinging, but she did not correct her. She only held her hand firm and bent close. "I am here, sweet one. Rest now." From the doorway, Luke's breath caught sharp. His shoulders bent as if struck, his hand pressing against the frame to hold himself steady. Emma looked up, meeting his eyes across the dim room, and for the first time she saw them crack open. There was no hardness there now, only pain, deep and raw, and something else, something close to longing. He stayed through the night in silence, a shadow on the threshold, watching the woman who comforted his daughter when he could not. And as the hours crawled toward dawn, something inside him began to shift, fragile and uncertain, but alive all the same. The fever broke with the dawn, leaving Josie pale but breathing steady at last. Emma sat slumped in the chair by her bed, her hand still resting lightly over the child's, her body aching from the long night. She had not slept, yet a calm relief filled her chest when she felt Josie's cool skin beneath her fingers. When she rose to fetch fresh water, she found Luke in the doorway again, the shadows beneath his eyes deep, his hat pulled low, though he had not stepped outside. He met her gaze for a moment, then looked away. She could not tell if it was gratitude or shame that stiffened his shoulders. By the week's end, Josie was well enough to sit in the yard, her laugh thin but bright as she played with a stick she had fashioned into a doll. Emma knelt beside her, brushing dust from her skirt, when she noticed two women on the road that ran past the Carter ranch. They slowed, speaking low but looking their way all the same. Emma did not need to strain to hear the tone. Their eyes told her enough. By evening she felt the whispers gather like a storm, the kind that spread faster than fire through dry grass. A woman staying at Luke Carter's house, no ring on her hand, no word given to the town preacher. When Luke returned from town that night, his jaw was set hard, his silence sharper than usual. He did not come to the table, only paced by the hearth, his fists clenching and unclenching as if he were fighting something he could not name. At last he stopped and turned on her, his voice low but edged with steel. "Folks are talking," he said, "about you, about me. They say I brought another woman here without proper word." His eyes flicked toward the window where Josie sat with her doll. "I will not have her branded for something she does not deserve." Emma felt her heart sink, though she kept her chin high. "I never asked to stay," she answered quietly. "It was your daughter who held me here, not my own doing." Luke's face tightened. "Then you should go," he said. "Tomorrow, when the stage comes through." His voice cracked slightly, though he covered it quick. "I will not have her grow up in the middle of talk she cannot understand." The words cut deep, sharper because part of her had known they were coming. She nodded, steady though her throat burned. "I will pack my things." That night, Josie discovered her case by the bed and cried until her face was blotched red. "You cannot leave," she pleaded, clutching Emma's arm with both hands. "I chose you. You belong here." Emma smoothed the girl's hair, her own tears threatening. "I will not forget you," she whispered, her voice soft as the rustle of the wind against the shutters. "But sometimes what we want is not what others will allow." Through the thin walls, she heard Luke pacing still, his boots heavy against the floor. Pride and grief pressed him, but neither eased the ache that hollowed her chest. She lay awake until morning, listening to Josie's restless sleep, her heart breaking at the thought of leaving a home she had never meant to find, but had begun to need more than breath. The storm came hard and sudden, rolling across the plains with a sound like cannon fire, the wind snapping at the shutters and tearing branches from the trees. Emma had just finished settling Josie into bed when the smell of smoke caught her nose, sharp and wrong. She hurried to the porch, her heart thudding, and saw the orange glow rising behind the barn, fire licking at the roof. She shouted for Luke, but he was already outside. his figure cutting through the dark as he ran across the yard. Without thinking, Emma gathered her skirts and followed, the rain striking her face in sharp needles. The barn doors bucked against the wind, smoke pouring out as the horses screamed inside. Luke heaved at the latch, his muscles straining, and Emma pressed her shoulder to the wood beside him. Together they forced the doors open and were met by a rush of heat that nearly drove them back. The air inside was thick, sparks showering down as the flames climbed higher into the rafters. The animals reared and kicked, trapped by fear. "Get them out!" Luke shouted, his voice rough with smoke. Emma ran to the nearest stall, fumbling with the rope until her hands burned. The horse bolted past her, nearly knocking her off her feet, but she steadied herself and moved to the next. Luke was already pulling at another gate, his face blackened with soot, his body moving with fierce purpose. The fire roared louder, beams creaking as if the whole place would come down on their heads. Emma's lungs screamed for air, her eyes stung until tears blurred her sight, but she did not stop. She tugged and coaxed until another horse burst free, then another, each one fleeing into the rain-slicked yard. She barely noticed her palms blistering against the rope, the pain dulled by the fear that if she faltered even for a moment, they would lose everything. At last, the stalls were empty, the barn still burning but the stock safe in the pasture. Emma staggered outside, coughing hard, her arms trembling with exhaustion. She fell to her knees in the mud, the rain washing soot from her face, her breath ragged. Luke dropped beside her, his chest heaving, his eyes wild. He reached for her hands, and when he saw the red welts and rising blisters, his face went still. "You are hurt," he said, his voice breaking though he tried to steady it. He pulled a strip of cloth from his shirt and began to wrap her palms, his fingers trembling as they touched her skin. She tried to tell him it was nothing, that she would heal, but the look in his eyes stopped her. His hands shook as he tied the cloth, his jaw tight, his breath uneven. He had faced fire and loss before, yet the thought of losing her now filled him with a fear he could not hide. For a long moment he held her hands as though they were the most fragile thing he had ever touched. The storm raged around them, the barn collapsed with a crash, but in the yard they knelt together, bound not by bargain or pride but by the truth neither had spoken until now. The storm had passed by the time they returned to the house, though the smell of smoke still clung to their clothes and the sound of the barn's collapse echoed in their ears. Luke had wrapped Emma's hands as best he could, his fingers awkward but tender, and now the two of them sat in the kitchen, with the lantern burning low between them. Josie slept soundly in her room, worn out from fear and the excitement of seeing the animals safe, leaving the house hushed but for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Emma cradled her blistered palms in her lap, the cloth damp with salve, her body aching from exhaustion. Luke sat across from her, elbows on the table, staring at the flame as if it carried the weight of all his thoughts. His jaw was tight, his face lined with shadows, and she could feel the storm still raging inside him, though the skies had cleared. At last he spoke, his voice rough, almost reluctant. "I swore I would never put myself in this place again," he said, his eyes fixed on the lantern. "Loving someone, letting them close. It feels like handing over your heart just to watch it get torn away. I lived through that once, and I cannot live through it again." Emma's throat tightened at the raw honesty in his words. She did not move closer, did not try to touch him, only watched his face in the flickering light. He glanced at her then, as if expecting her to argue, to tell him his fear was weakness. Instead, she kept her voice gentle. "Sometimes love is not about how long it lasts," she said. "Sometimes it is about how much it gives while it is here." He looked at her sharply, almost in anger, but she did not flinch. She let the words settle in the space between them, calm and steady. "My mother used to tell me that," Emma went on. "She said you cannot measure love by years, only by the way it fills a room, the way it carries you when you need it most." Luke's shoulders sank, his hands flexing against the table as though the truth pressed too heavy to hold. "Do you not see?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "I loved once, and it ended in the dirt. Every morning I wake and remember, and every night I wonder if I could have saved her. If I let you in, if I let anyone in, I fear I will lose them too, and I cannot bury another piece of my life." Emma felt her eyes sting, but she did not cry. "You are not asked to bury me," she said softly. "You are only asked to let yourself live again." For a long moment he sat silent, the clock ticking loud in the quiet room. His eyes met hers across the table, and for the first time, he did not look away. Something in his face shifted, a crack in the armor he had carried so long, and though no more words passed between them, Emma knew he had heard her, truly heard her. And in that fragile silence, with the lantern flame swaying low, it felt like the first step toward something he thought he had lost forever. The evening air was warm, carrying the scent of sage from the hills, when Emma stepped into the kitchen and stopped short. The table had been scrubbed until it gleamed, a clean cloth stretched across its surface, and down the middle ran a row of jars filled with wildflowers plucked from the meadow. Their bright petals made the dim room glow, as though sunlight had been brought indoors. At the end of the table stood Josie, her cheeks pink from effort, her eyes shining with pride. "I said it myself," she declared, lifting her chin as if daring anyone to doubt her skill. "You both have to sit." Emma smiled, her heart swelling at the sight. She glanced toward Luke, who leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed, but his mouth twitching with something close to a smile. He gave a short nod, and together they took their places at the table. Josie bustled about like a little hostess, fetching bread, beans, and a jar of pickled beets, each dish set with a flourish. The meal began in awkward silence, Luke clearing his throat, Emma trying to think of words to smooth the edges. But Josie's chatter filled the space, her voice bright, as she told stories about the calf she wanted to keep as a pet, about the ribbon she found in Emma's trunk, about the way her papa snored loud enough to rattle the walls. Emma laughed, clapping a hand over her mouth, and, to her surprise, Luke chuckled too, low and rough, but real. The sound startled Josie into more giggles, and soon the house echoed with something it had not held in years. As the dishes emptied, the candles burned low, and the warmth of the room seemed to draw them closer. Luke leaned back in his chair, his eyes flicking to Josie, before settling on Emma. He reached into his pocket, his hand closing around something hidden. His face was unreadable, but Emma saw the way his jaw tightened, the way his breath caught. He stood slowly, pushing his chair back, and came to her side. Without flourish or pretense, he set a small object on the table before her. Emma's breath caught when she saw it. A ring carved from wood, the grain smoothed by careful hands, the edges rounded as though he had worked it long into the nights. "It is not much," he said, his voice low but steady, "but I made it. I do not want you to leave, Emma. Not tomorrow, not the next day. Stay here, with us." The simple words carried more weight than any speech could have. Emma felt her eyes blur with tears, her hands trembling as she lifted the ring. She slipped it onto her finger, the fit snug and warm, and looked up at him through the shimmer of her tears. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I will stay." Josie clapped her hands in triumph, laughing so hard she nearly tipped the jar of flowers. Emma laughed through her tears, Luke's lips curving into the faintest smile. And in that small kitchen, with wildflowers blooming on the table, a family began to take its true shape. The weeks that followed carried a gentler rhythm, the kind that settled into the bones and made each morning feel steadier than the one before. Emma rose with the dawn to light the stove, the scent of coffee filling the house before the sun cleared the ridge. Luke would already be outside, his boots crunching across the yard as he checked the stock, and Josie's voice would soon follow, calling to the chickens as though they were old friends. The days were still hard, the work never ending, yet the weight of it was shared now. The silence of the house broken by laughter and small comforts that had been missing for too long. Emma found her place in the garden, coaxing green shoots from soil that had once lain barren, her hands steady as she tied bean vines to their stakes. Luke came to her side often, wordless at first, carrying buckets or leaning on the fence while she worked. He began to speak more in those moments, telling her about the land, about the way his father had built the first fence line, about storms that had swept through, and fires that had nearly taken everything. His voice no longer sounded like stone breaking but like soil turning, heavy yet open. Inside, Josie followed Emma from room to room, her chatter filling the house like music. She carried her treasures still, buttons and ribbons and small stones, but now she added to them things Emma gave her, scraps of cloth sewn into dolls, flowers pressed between pages of a book. She leaned against Emma's side when tired, her head finding that place as though it had always belonged there. Luke noticed, his eyes shadowed at first, then softening as the days passed. The gossip in town shifted with the season. At first, the whispers had been sharp, pitying or judgmental, but as neighbors passed the ranch and saw the fences mended, the fields greening, and laughter carrying across the yard, the words changed. She stayed, they said. Surprise, mingling with respect. Luke Carter had not been left alone in his silence after all. One bright afternoon, Luke brought out the wagon, brushing it down until it gleamed as much as it could. He told Emma and Josie they were going into town for something special. Emma dressed in her best blue, the one dress she had managed to keep neat, and Josie wore a ribbon bright against her dark braids. Luke himself had combed his hair and buttoned his cleanest shirt, though the collar sat crooked until Emma straightened it with a gentle hand. At the photographer's shop they stood together, Emma seated with Josie on her lap, Luke behind with his hand resting on Emma's shoulder. The photographer adjusted the light, fussed with the backdrop, and told them to hold still. For a long breath the three of them stood close, and when the shutter clicked, the moment was caught forever. A family formed, not by chance, but by choice. When the picture arrived a week later and was placed above the mantel, Emma stood with Luke and Josie at her side. She gazed at the image of herself, no longer a weary traveler pulled from the dust, but a woman who had found her place. And in the reflection of glass, with Josie's laughter rising behind her and Luke's steady presence at her side, she knew the whispers in town spoke true. She had stayed, and in staying, she had built a home. The evening settled soft over the Carter place, the last of the light fading from the hills as the crickets began their steady song. Emma smoothed the quilt over Josie's small frame, tucking it snug beneath her chin. The girl stirred, her lashes heavy, a faint smile on her lips. "You'll be here when I wake, won't you?" she murmured. Emma brushed a curl from her forehead and whispered, "Always." Josie sighed in contentment, her fingers loosening their grip on the rag doll she carried everywhere, and within moments her breathing evened into the rhythm of sleep. Emma lingered a moment longer, her heart tightening at the sight. The stubborn child who had once dragged her down the dusty road now lay peaceful, certain of the home she had built with her own bold choice. Emma kissed her cheek, blew out the lamp, and stepped into the hallway, closing the door with a gentle click. The porch welcomed her with the cool hush of night. The stars stretched wide and bright, scattered across the sky like lanterns, the kind that seemed to promise both mystery and comfort. Luke stood by the railing, his hat pushed back, the glow of the lantern at his side catching the planes of his face. He turned when she joined him, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet weight. They stood together in silence, the kind that had once felt sharp but now lay easy between them. At length Luke spoke, his voice low, almost hesitant. "I thought I would never deserve this," he said. "Not after all I lost. I told myself it was finished, that love was something meant for other men, not me." He paused, his hand rubbing the back of his neck, his shoulders tight as though the words themselves were hard to carry. Emma waited, her gaze steady on him, her hands folded in front of her. He let out a slow breath. "But here it is," he went on, his voice softening. "Not because I found it, but because Josie dragged it to me, dust on her cheeks and fire in her eyes. She chose you when I would not, and she made me see what I thought I never would again." Emma's throat tightened, her eyes stinging, but she laughed lightly, brushing a tear before it could fall. "Seems your daughter knew the truth before either of us did," she said. Luke's lips curved in the faintest smile, his hand reaching for hers, rough and warm. He held it there, thumb brushing her knuckles, the stars wheeling overhead as if to seal the moment. For a long while they stood that way, no words needed, the silence full of the kind of peace that comes only when hearts finally find rest. And so their story, born of grief and stubbornness, became a tale of choice and love, not planned, but all the stronger for it. If you enjoyed sharing in their journey, come along for more in Western Love Legends. And do not forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Your kindness keeps these prairie stories alive. And as Josie herself might say, sometimes it just takes a bossy little girl to fix what grown folks are too stubborn to see.